And so I feel that the behavioural lesson that has been taught to Labour backbenchers here is not a healthy one for the Prime Minister. I'm not comparing Labour MPs to 5-year-old boys, but there are some similarities.
Hello and welcome to Coffee House Shots. I'm James Heale and I'm joined today by Isabel Hardman and Michael Simmons. Now, the most extraordinary scenes happened at today's Prime Minister's Questions. I think, Isabel, you'd probably agree that it was the most remarkable session of PMQs we've had since the general election. Talk us through what happened today and why everyone is talking about neither of the two people who really spoke, Keir Starmer and Kevin Badenoch, but actually the woman next to Keir Starmer, which was Rachel Reeves.
Yeah, I mean, not just remarkable since the general election. I'd say remarkable probably over the past kind of few electoral cycles, actually. PMQs has been pretty formulaic for quite a while. And today, Keir Starmer was totally brutal, but not towards the opposition, towards his own most senior colleague, Rachel Reeves, who then appeared to be crying while he was refusing to guarantee her survival until the end of this parliament, which was unexpected. She'd obviously had a bruising few weeks, particularly bruising last 24 hours in the U-turns that have happened in the welfare bill, and also the way in which colleagues have been laying the blame for the mess over that legislation at her feet and saying that she is toast. But I don't think people expected her to be in such an emotional state in the chamber as we saw. So there was a sequence of events where she came in not looking very happy, I think it's fair to say. And then I think it was the penultimate question to Starmer from Kemi Badenoch was, does he still want the Chancellor to remain in place until the next election, something he has previously guaranteed? And Starmer does not repeat that guarantee. And at that point, 2 tears come down Rachel Reeves's cheeks. And she is sort of nodding and agreeing with him whilst also looking. And I think all of us could sort of feel how she was feeling. It was so palpable, looking like the wind had been knocked out of her sails. And then Kemi Badenoch gave Starmer a second opportunity by saying how awful for the Chancellor that he won't give that guarantee. And Starmer again dodges it, says he's proud of the first year that Labour's had in government, and says the Chancellor's been leading on all these things and we're grateful to her for it, which sounded a bit to me like the kind of formulation you'd use when you just sack someone for being a bit rubbish. So I don't know what's going on. There's been some claim afterwards that Reeves was emotional about a personal matter, which then leads to 2 questions. One, if something dreadful has happened, obviously we have a huge amount of sympathy. Why the hell was she in the chamber? Yeah. And why had the opposition not been alerted of this via the usual channels? I know people think that politicians are completely ruthless, but they do tend to lay off somebody if there's been a personal tragedy or if they're not well or something like that, rather than saying, where's the Chancellor? Where's the Chancellor? Which would have been the question if she hadn't been there. And also, why was Starmer not more compassionate? I mean, I think that actually casts him in an even worse light. If something was going on in Rachel Reeves's personal life, perhaps he didn't know about that. But either way, I think this is, aside from the Chancellor's emotional state, the fact that he did not guarantee her longevity in the way that he has previously, which he obviously also shouldn't have done because it makes you a huge hostage to situations like this, that it is a big deal.
Absolutely right. And I think, Isabel, after yesterday's vote, when a lot of Labour MPs have never felt more distant from their leader, to have such a sort of lack of empathy or lack of supposed Labour values, I think that will really put a divide between the MPs watching it back and the people around Keir Starmer, because it was wooden, it was perfunctory, it was frankly didn't seem human. Michael, Isabel there mentions, of course, the fact that there were 2 tears rolling down Rachel Reeves' cheeks, perhaps a very different type of 2-tier Keir we're used to. But also, how was the bond markets reacting to all of this? Because there's been some talk online of sort of tears of gold in terms of the effect on the UK markets.
The bond yields in terms of all of them, the 5, the 30-year, have all jumped up. The 10-year borrowing cost is on course for its biggest one-day rise since October 2022. And James, you'll remember very well that was during the Truss premiership. In terms of what's going on here, it's always a bit difficult to really work out why traders buy and sell in the way they do. Speaking to people, the suggestion seems to be that at the start of PMQs, they took this as a signal that the Chancellor was sort of imminently either going to resign or be sacked, as we've discussed. And I think as much as markets would be critical of a lot of the stuff that the Chancellor has done since she's been in number 11, they would see the Chancellor being removed, as yet another unstable, destabilising thing. I mean, Rachel Reeves is quite sound, actually, at least in what she wants to do in terms of fiscal policy. I mean, she said in 2015 that the Labour Party was not the party for those on benefits. She'll be upset that we've reminded people of that. And even though I think personally the reforms they wanted to make to the welfare system don't go far enough in terms of the fiscal challenge that we're facing, it was still, seen as at least an acknowledgement that the government accepts we have a fiscal problem and they want to do something about it. And markets seeing that her potentially being removed for that seems to be why the borrowing costs jumped. If it is because of that, then we can expect them kind of to fall down again tomorrow. But if there's something, more structurally that's being missed, then these costs are going to go higher and higher. And to be honest, it's worse news than it normally would be for any chancellor to have borrowing costs going up. Because just yesterday, the OBR sort of reviewed their assessment, reviewed their forecasts that they always make at budgets and so forth. And they found that looking 5 years ahead, which is crucial because looking 5 years ahead is how you judge if the fiscal rules are being met, that they've been underestimating how much the government borrows by sort of enough to wipe out the headroom. So that already dented the headroom. The U-turn on the benefits cuts is going to take a chunk out of the headroom. And now we've got even higher borrowing costs. So, whatever Rachel Reeves was upset about, she's going to be a lot more upset come the autumn.
And Isabel, that teases us nicely to talk about how we have the fallout from last night's vote. And of course, the two most obvious ministers in the firing line after all those concessions and the fact that 49 Labour MPs still went through and voted for the rebel amendment. Who they are going to be, Liz Kendall and Rachel Reeves. Just talk us about sort of your thoughts on the fallout from yesterday's vote.
Yeah, I mean, my hunch was that Liz Kendall was probably a bit unfairly actually going to be in the firing line here, not least because I watched the whole debate yesterday afternoon and I may have missed it. It may have been the moment that I went to get a cup of tea in those sort of 5 hours, but I don't think I heard anyone actually praising Liz Kendall. There were lots of Labour MPs very pointedly praising Stephen Timms and, paying tribute to his, years of campaigning and scrutiny on work and pensions. He's obviously a former Treasury Minister, but was also chair of the Work and Pensions Select Committee. So he really does know his stuff. And one of the reasons they brought him in to do this review as a minister was really to sort of lend credibility or to steal his credibility, I think, on this topic. So maybe it was just that they were so busy trying to pay tribute to Stephen Timms and to say, with all due respect to you, Stephen Timms, and your review, it doesn't make sense to have a review that concludes just as the changes you're supposed to be reviewing will actually start, and it didn't make sense. And they just forgot to mention Liz Kendall in there. But I didn't detect a particular amount of affection for Kendall from MPs across the House yesterday. And I say unfairly in terms of her being in the firing line because I think the consensus is amongst Labour MPs that these are not Liz Kendall's designs. She did not come up with them. Indeed, the Treasury was briefing against her months ago that she wasn't coming up with enough welfare reforms, by which the Treasury obviously meant savings. And indeed, we know that the extra 500 million of cuts that Rachel Reeves added to these reforms after the initial publication of them, I think it was about a week after Kendall had announced them in the Commons, they were all to do with savings rather than the sort of ground principles of reform. So in a way, I think this would have made Liz Kendall the kind of the fall guy for this when it was actually the Treasury's fault. And that may well still be the case, that it's just easier to move your work and pensions secretary, send her off to be leader of the House or something like that, and say that we're moving on and actually to protect Rachel Reeves. But the way in which events unfolded at Prime Minister's questions, emotion aside, now puts Rachel Reeves right back in the spotlight again in terms of her position. And then I think the other thing, just to not just make this about two women who are getting all the focus when it's Prime Minister Keir Starmer who's in charge. I think, and I rarely say this phrase, but as a mother, I do actually think that there are lessons from parenting for the Prime Minister, who likes to talk a lot about being a father, from what's happened over the past 24 hours, which is parents know that if you're going to hold out on something and say no to your kids, the worst thing you could possibly do would be to hold out for a long time and then cave at the very last minute. Because the message you are sending to your little darling is that if they are utterly hideous to you for days or hours, and if they just scream for, an extended period of time, at some point you're going to give in. And you may believe for most of that time that you're not going to give in, and that you are a principled and good parent or leader or prime minister. But if you do at some point cave in, then you've actually made things so much worse for yourself, because the next time they want something, whether they are 5 years old and wanting a nice lolly for breakfast, or a Labour backbencher who doesn't want you to make any public sector spending cuts at all, they will just think, if I just hold out for long enough, I'll get my way. And if I'm told no 10 times, I just need to ask 12 times instead. And so I feel that the behavioural lesson that has been taught to Labour backbenchers here is not a healthy one for the Prime Minister. I'm not comparing Labour MPs to 5-year-old boys, but there are some similarities.
Yes, and there is not such a big age difference as perhaps there once was. Thank you, Isabel. Thank you, Michael. And thank you for listening to Coffee House Shots.